3 soldiers were witnessed beating a child in the dark. 2 hours later, she was dead. How could an entire city know exactly who attacked an 11-year-old girl? Yet the justice system brought absolutely 0 charges against them, because the killers wore a uniform that the law was terrified to touch. When young Elizabeth Slater was found strangled to death in Edinburgh, investigators quickly tracked the suspects back to the military barracks. But instead of a trial, the gates of justice swung shut to protect the state's own enforcers. If you want to understand how institutional power can completely erase a crime to avoid a public scandal, subscribe, because this forgotten file shows what happens when the law decides some monsters are simply too important to hang. To understand how this young girl walked into such a lethal trap, we have to look at the sharp social divide of historic Edinburgh. Elizabeth Slater lived in the Canongate, a crowded, impoverished district packed with tenements, narrow alleys, and families struggling to get by. Looming just past the edge of her neighborhood was Holyrood Park, a sprawling, dark landscape that felt entirely cut off from the city once the sun went down. At 2 a.m. on the morning of August 19th, 11-year-old Elizabeth did something completely out of character. She quietly slipped out of her family home into the pitch blackness, carrying a bundle of clothes with her. The evidence strongly suggests this wasn't a random flight into the night. It was a prearranged meeting. She was heading into the park to meet 3 Dragoons, elite, mounted cavalry soldiers stationed at the local barracks. To a young girl from the slums, these men represented absolute authority, status, and power. She thought she was meeting people she could trust, but she had actually just stepped directly into a hunting ground. The crime and the witnesses. Elizabeth was not alone in the park that night, and the darkness did not keep her hidden. Deep in the early hours of the morning, civilian witnesses passing near the park area caught sight of the 3 Dragoons. But they weren't patrolling. They were actively assaulting the 11-year-old girl, beating her severely and making her cry out in distress. Yet, in a tragic reflection of the era's social dynamics, no one stepped in to challenge 3 armed cavalrymen of the state. By 4 a.m., the soldiers were gone, and Elizabeth's body was discovered in an unspeakable state near Holyrood. The physical evidence left behind was brutal. Her face was completely blackened from intense trauma, and her throat bore the deep, unmistakable marks of manual strangulation. The discovery of a child's strangled body right outside the neighborhood sparked immediate fury among the residents of the Canongate. This wasn't a hidden crime. It was an open atrocity, and the public finger pointed straight at the military garrison. Under intense civilian pressure, the local authorities had to act. They focused their investigation on the nearby barracks and quickly identified 2 privates who had been absent without leave during the exact hours of the murder. The 2 soldiers were arrested and detained, but the legal mechanism that followed was far from standard. Instead of a transparent, public interrogation by civilian magistrates, the men were subjected to a closed-door examination. In this era, a dangerous jurisdictional friction existed between local civilian courts and the British military. When an ordinary citizen was accused, the system moved ruthlessly. But when the state's own enforcers were put in chains, the priorities of the legal system quietly began to shift from finding the truth to managing a crisis. Then came the decision that left the public utterly paralyzed with disbelief. After a brief, private review, the authorities abruptly released both suspects. No grand jury was called, no indictments were handed down, and absolutely 0 formal charges were brought against the Dragoons. The men simply walked out of custody and back into their barracks, legally untouchable. This is where we see the invisible shield of institutional self-preservation at work. In historic Edinburgh, the Dragoons weren't just soldiers, they were the muscle of the state, maintaining British Crown authority over a notoriously volatile Scottish populace. To put 3 elite cavalrymen on the civilian gallows based on the testimony of poor tenements dwellers risked sparking military mutinies, devastating army morale, and triggering widespread civil-military riots. The system broke its own fundamental rules of due process, choosing to absorb the murder of an 11-year-old girl as acceptable collateral damage rather than allow a public trial to compromise the integrity of the uniform. To justify releasing the suspects, the legal system relied on a rigid, hypocritical double standard regarding evidence. The magistrates argued that while civilian witnesses had explicitly seen the Dragoons beating Elizabeth Slater, no one had actually witnessed the exact moment the fingers tightened around her throat. By treating the witnessed assault and the fatal strangulation as two entirely separate events, the court found a legal loophole it needed to protect the garrison. This technicality effectively sent a message to the public. The word of lower-class civilians from the Canongate was not heavy enough to outweigh the word of the state's military elite. If you enjoy examining true cases where the law becomes the real mystery, comment below with your thoughts on how this system handled evidence, because these stories highlight the hidden mechanisms of historical power. Elizabeth Slater's killers walked completely free, protected by a system that valued institutional stability far more than the life of a vulnerable child. No further suspects were hunted down, no massive manhunt was launched, and the scoundrels who perpetrated this vile outrage simply faded back into the safety of the British military apparatus. The case of the Holyrood Park murder leaves us with a chilling realization about the history of our justice system. The law is a human invention, and when it is forced to choose between protecting a defenseless citizen or protecting its own structural power, it has often chosen itself. Elizabeth Slater was entirely erased by the very authorities who were sworn to avenge her, leaving behind only a brief, infuriating clipping in the margins of true crime history. What do you think about this case? Do you believe the Edinburgh magistrates genuinely lacked the evidence to convict, or did the military pull the strings from behind closed doors? Let me know your theories in the comments below, and subscribe if you want to uncover more forgotten historical mysteries where the powerful escape the scales of justice.